What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. In fact, if you turn on CNN or Fox News right now, you won't hear a single whisper about it. But Donald Trump has prepared a legal weapon, a specific executive order that effectively dissolves the federal government as we know it, not in 4 years, but in his first 90 days. We aren't talking about tax cuts. We aren't talking about a border wall. We are talking about a strategy called Schedule F on steroids that grants the president absolute, unchecked power to fire up to 50,000 federal employees who effectively run the country. Beltway insiders are calling it the red wedding of American politics. The mainstream media is ignoring it because they don't understand the mechanism yet. But by the time this video ends, you're going to understand exactly how Executive Order 12099 works, why the deep state is terrified, and why your life and your bank account are about to change forever. And here's the kicker. It's entirely constitutional, and there is absolutely nothing Congress can do to stop it. To understand the magnitude of what is about to happen, we have to look at the reality of Washington, D.C. that the cameras never show you. You need to understand the war of 2017. When Donald Trump walked into the White House in 2017, he thought he was the CEO of America. He thought he gave an order, and the machine executed it. He was wrong. He walked into a trap. He discovered what political scientists call the fourth branch of government, the administrative state. We're talking about 2.2 million unelected federal employees. These are the people who actually write the regulations, enforce the environmental codes, audit your taxes, and grant security clearances. In 2017, these people didn't just disagree with Trump. They actively sabotaged him. Documents went missing. Orders were ignored. Leaks sprang up like geysers. It was a bureaucratic insurgency. Remember the anonymous op-ed in the New York Times? That wasn't a politician. That was a bureaucrat. Fast forward to today. The landscape has shifted dramatically. The Trump team hasn't been sitting around playing golf for the last few years. They have been in the lab. Think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and the America First Policy Institute have spent millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours reverse engineering the federal government. They realized that the only way to govern is to break the civil service protections that have been in place since the 1880s. You see, right now, it is harder to fire a federal bureaucrat than it is to convict a mob boss. The process takes years. It's designed that way. It was supposed to prevent corruption, but in reality, it created a permanent ruling class that outlasts every president. The stakes right now are higher than they have ever been since the Civil War. Why? Because the global order is fracturing. We have an $850 billion trade deficit with China. We have a proxy war in Europe that's draining our stockpiles. We have a southern border crisis that involves millions of undocumented entries. The argument from the Trump camp is simple. You cannot fix these existential crises with a government that fights its own leader. You need a unified chain of command. You need a wartime footing. But the opposition, the people currently sitting in those corner offices in D.C., view this as the end of democracy itself. They see the civil service as the guardrails that keep a president from becoming a king. So here's the situation. You have an immovable object, the bureaucracy, meeting an unstoppable force, Trump's new legal strategy. And unlike 2016, this time, Trump isn't bringing a knife to a gunfight. He's bringing a legislative nuke. And this affects you directly. Why? Because if this executive order goes through, the regulatory state that controls gas prices, interest rates, and small business rules changes overnight. The friction is gone. The shock absorbers are removed. Let's get into the weeds. Let's break down the strategy, because the genius of this plan is in the details that the nightly news glosses over. This revolves to a concept called Schedule F. Now, stick with me, because this sounds boring, but it is actually the key to absolute power. In October 2020, right before the election, Trump signed an executive order creating a new category of federal workers called Schedule F. Historically, you have political appointees, the guys the president picks, and career civil servants, the guys who stay there forever. Schedule F created a bridge. It said that any career employee who has a policy-determining, policy-making, or policy-advocating role can be reclassified. Once you are reclassified as Schedule F, you lose your job protections. You become an at-will employee. That means you can be fired for poor performance, for insubordination, or frankly, because the president doesn't like your tie. Biden rescinded this on his first day in office, obviously. But the new plan, let's call it Executive Order 140099, is Schedule F brought back from the dead, injected with steroids, and given a double shot of adrenaline. Here is the three-step breakdown of the strategy grounded in the unitary executive theory. 1. The Great Reclassification. The purge list. The first step of the strategy doesn't happen in the Oval Office. It happens in the HR departments. The plan calls for an immediate audit of every single role in the federal government. We aren't just talking about the Deputy Secretary of State. We are talking about the mid-level manager at the EPA who decides which wetlands get protected. We are talking about the lawyer at the DOJ who decides which cases to prosecute. We are talking about the analyst at the CIA who decides what intel makes it to the president's desk. The definition of policymaking is being expanded. Under the old rules, maybe 4,000 people were political appointees. Under EO 1499, estimates suggest this number could swell to 50,000. Imagine 50,000 pink slips going out in the first quarter of the administration. It's a decapitation strike against the administrative state. The goal is to remove the institutional memory that resists change. 2. The impoundment power play. This is the part that almost nobody is talking about, and it is arguably more powerful than the firings. You might be asking, how does he pay for the things he wants if Congress controls the purse strings? Trump's legal team is reviving a power that hasn't been used aggressively since Richard Nixon. Impoundment. Historically, the president had the power to simply not spend money that Congress appropriated if he felt it was wasteful. Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 to stop this. But Trump's lawyers are arguing that the 1974 Act is unconstitutional because it violates the separation of powers. Here is the play. Trump orders the Department of Education to stop funding universities that implement DEI programs. Congress screams, "We allocated that money." Trump says, "I'm impounding it because it violates the Constitution." He forces a constitutional crisis that goes to the Supreme Court. And looking at the current makeup of the Supreme Court, his team likes their odds. If he wins that battle, he gains the power of the purse. He can starve agencies he doesn't like, the FBI, the IRS, the Department of Education, without needing a single vote in Congress. He can effectively shut down entire wings of the government by simply refusing to sign the checks. 3. The acting official loophole. Now you might be thinking, okay, he fires everyone, he starves the agencies, but he still needs the Senate to confirm his new people, right? Wrong. This is the Vacancies Act loophole. Usually, if a cabinet secretary leaves, the president nominates a replacement and the Senate holds hearings. It takes months. It's slow. It's public. The strategy here is to rely almost exclusively on acting officials. When you fire a Schedule F employee or a political appointee, you can temporarily fill that spot with an acting director. These people don't need Senate confirmation immediately. They can serve for hundreds of days. And when their time is up, you replace them with another acting official. This allows the administration to bypass the Senate entirely. They can install loyalists, people who are fully aligned with the MAGA agenda, into critical positions at the NSA, the Pentagon, and the Treasury without ever having to answer a question from a hostile senator. Let that sink in for a second. We are talking about a mechanism where the president can 1. Fire the people who disagree with him, Schedule F. 2. Defund the programs he dislikes, impoundment. 3. Install the people he wants without permission, Vacancies Act. This creates a vertical power structure that flows directly from the Resolute desk to the street level with zero interference. Critics call this dictatorship. They say it destroys the nonpartisan expertise that keeps the water clean and the planes flying. They argue that if you replace a nuclear energy expert with a political loyalist, you are asking for a catastrophe. Supporters call it restoring the Constitution. They argue that Article 2 says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular, not a president and a bureaucracy. They argue that if the people vote for a policy, the government should execute it, period. But here is where it gets really interesting and dangerous. This strategy isn't just theory. The lists of replacements are already being written. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 has created a LinkedIn-style database of vetted loyal conservatives ready to deploy. They aren't scrambling for resumes like they were in 2016. They have an army in waiting. They have drafted the executive orders. They have written the regulations. They have the legal briefs ready to file the moment the lawsuits hit. This is a hostile takeover of the federal government, planned with the precision of a military invasion. And you have to ask yourself, what happens to the markets when this chaos begins? What happens to the US dollar when the Federal Reserve's independence is challenged? Because make no mistake, the Federal Reserve is on this list too. The media paints Trump as chaotic, impulsive, and disorganized, and maybe the man himself is. But the machine behind him, the legal architects drafting Executive Order 14099, they are colder, sharper, and more organized than anything the Democratic establishment has faced in decades. They aren't looking to negotiate, they are looking to conquer. And the scary part? The current legal framework actually supports most of what they want to do. The Supreme Court has been signaling for years that they believe the administrative state has become too powerful. They recently overturned the Chevron deference, a massive ruling that stripped power from agencies and gave it back to the courts and the president. That was the opening shot. Executive Order 114099 is the full invasion. But to really understand the impact, we have to look at the players. Who are the winners and losers in this scenario? Because when you shake the jar this hard, money moves. A lot of money. And that brings us to the oligarchs, the defense contractors, and the foreign powers watching this unfold. Because when we talk about the deep state, we aren't talking about guys in hooded robes chanting in a basement. That's the cartoon version they want you to believe in so they can mock you for asking questions. No. The deep state is boring. It's practical. It's a GS-15 bureaucrat at the Environmental Protection Agency who has been there for 25 years, who cannot be fired, and who decides to rewrite a definition of wetlands that bankrupts 1,000 farmers in the Midwest. It's a mid-level director at the Department of Justice who decides which investigations get funding and which ones get delayed due to resource constraints. It is the permanent, unelected machinery of government that stays in Washington while presidents come and go. Presidents are temporary employees. The bureaucracy, they have tenure. And Executive Order 14099 is designed to strip that tenure away. But before we get into the mechanics of the purge, we have to follow the money. I told you there are winners and losers here. This isn't just about politics. It's about a massive reallocation of trillions of dollars in capital. Let's look at the winners. For the last 20 years, the power center of the American economy has been a specific alliance: big tech censorship, globalist finance like BlackRock pushing ESG scores, and a defense industrial complex addicted to forever wars in the Middle East. That alliance is the old guard. They are the ones panicking right now. The new guard, the people backing this executive order, represent a different kind of capital. We are talking about the Silicon Valley right. We're talking about the Elon Musks, the Peter Thiels, the Mark Andreessens. Why are they backing Trump's war on the administrative state? Because the administrative state is the only thing standing in their way. Think about it. Who is investigating SpaceX every other week? Federal agencies. Who is trying to break up the crypto markets? The SEC. Who is regulating AI development into the ground before it even starts? The safety commissions, staffed by people who don't know how to code. These tech titans aren't donating hundreds of millions of dollars out of charity. They are buying a demolition crew. They want the regulatory agencies gutted so they can build the future. AI, space travel, decentralized finance, without asking permission from a bureaucrat who thinks the cloud is something that produces rain. If this order goes through, expect a massive bull run in deregulated tech, crypto, and domestic energy. The Green New Deal subsidies will vanish overnight, and that capital will flood into nuclear, oil, and gas. But then there are the losers, and this is where it gets dangerous. The defense contractors who rely on the old model of warfare, massive, slow, expensive occupations, are in the crosshairs. The Trump doctrine, supported by this new circle, is shifting towards space dominance, cyber warfare, and specialized deterrence. If you are a legacy defense firm whose business model depends on a 20-year occupation of a desert nation, you are in trouble. But if you are a startup building autonomous drone swarms, you're about to become the new Lockheed Martin. This is a changing of the guard. And historically, when you try to take money away from the military-industrial complex's old guard, things get violent. They don't just lobby, they destabilize. And that brings us to the mechanisms. How does Executive Order 14099 actually work? Most people don't know this, but the President of the United States actually has very little control over the federal government. It sounds crazy, right? But since the Pendleton Act of 1883 and solidified by civil service laws in the 1970s, it is illegal to fire most federal employees for political reasons. If a Department of Education official refuses to implement the president's policy, the president technically cannot fire them. It takes 2 years of litigation, review boards, and union appeals to remove a single incompetent employee. EO 114099 flips the table. It revives a concept known as Schedule F. Here is the mechanism in plain English. It reclassifies tens of thousands of federal employees who have policy-determining roles. Right now, they are classified as competitive service, meaning they are protected. They are civil servants. EO 114099 moves them into the accepted service. In the corporate world, we call this at-will employment. It means that if you are a policy analyst at the State Department and you leak a memo to the New York Times to undermine the president's negotiations, you don't get a warning. You don't get a union rep. You get a cardboard box, a security escort to the parking lot, and your clearance is revoked before you hit the elevator button. We aren't talking about a few dozen people. The plan estimates reclassifying up to 50,000 federal employees across the DOJ, the State Department, the Pentagon, and the intelligence community. Let that number sink in. 50,000. This is a decapitation strike against the mid-level management of the U.S. government. It clears out the ideological layer that has blocked conservative policies for decades. But there is a second mechanism, one that is even more powerful and much less discussed. It's called impoundment. You need to understand this word because you're going to hear it every day on the news in about 6 months. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. They spend the money, but the president executes the spending. In 1974, Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act to stop Richard Nixon from refusing to spend money on programs he hated. They tied the president's hands. Trump's legal team has already drafted the arguments to challenge this act in the Supreme Court. Their argument is simple. The 1974 Act is unconstitutional. The president has the executive authority to pause or withhold funding if he believes it is wasteful or contrary to national interests. If the Supreme Court sides with him, and remember, with the current 6-3 conservative majority, specifically the skepticism shown by Justices Thomas and Alito toward administrative power, this is a very real possibility. It gives Trump a kill switch for the deep state. Imagine this scenario. Congress passes a budget that gives $50 billion to foreign aid or green energy subsidies. Trump signs it. But then, using his restored impoundment power, he simply doesn't release the funds. He starves the beast. He doesn't need to fire the employees at the Department of Education if he refuses to release the money to pay the electric bill for their headquarters. This is the two-pincer attack. Schedule F to fire the personnel, and impoundment to cut off the funding. Now you might be thinking, this sounds great, let's drain the swamp. Or maybe you're thinking, this sounds like a dictatorship. Regardless of where you stand, you need to understand the opposition, because the empire is going to strike back. You do not threaten the livelihoods of 2.2 million federal employees and the trillion-dollar industries that rely on them without facing a counterattack. We are already seeing the early stages of this resistance. It's happening in 3 phases. Phase 1 is the paper war. Right now, as we speak, inside agencies like the DOJ and the EPA, bureaucrats are proofing their work. They are destroying documents, encrypting files, and moving sensitive communications to private servers. They are preparing to slow walk every single order. If the White House orders a policy change, they will demand it in writing. Then they will submit it for legal review. Then they will ask for an environmental impact study. Then they will leak the draft to the Washington Post to cause a public outcry. They will use the bureaucracy's own weight to crush the reform. Phase 2 is lawfare. We are going to see a constitutional crisis that makes 2020 look like a warm-up. Every single firing under Schedule F will be sued. The unions, the AFGE and NTEU, have amassed war chests of hundreds of millions of dollars specifically for this legal battle. They will judge shop. They will file injunctions in the District of Columbia or Hawaii or California to freeze the executive order nationwide. They will try to run out the clock on Trump's 4-year term. But Phase 3 is the one that should keep you up at night. Phase 3 is the intelligence revolt. We saw a glimpse of this in 2016 and 2020. The letter signed by 51 intelligence officials claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, that was a flex. That was the intelligence community showing they can shape the narrative to protect their own. If Trump actually moves to strip security clearances from the intelligence apparatchiks, if he tries to audit the CIA's black budget or release the JFK files or the Epstein client list, the gloves will come off. We are talking about selective leaks of damaging information. We are talking about manufactured scandals. We are talking about intelligence briefings being withheld from the commander-in-chief. There is a terrifying concept in geopolitics called the Praetorian Guard problem. In ancient Rome, the emperor's bodyguards eventually realized they held the swords, so they started deciding who the emperor was. The U.S. intelligence community has become a modern Praetorian Guard. They view themselves as the adults in the room, the guardians of the republic who must protect the state from the transient whims of the voters. Trump views them as a rogue state within a state. This is an existential conflict. Only one side can survive. Either the elected president asserts control over the intelligence agencies, or the intelligence agencies effectively veto the results of the election. And this internal war isn't happening in a vacuum. The world is watching. While Washington tears itself apart in courtrooms and leaked memos, our adversaries are taking notes. Xi Jinping is analyzing the chaos. If the U.S. military leadership is purged and replaced, there is a window of transition, a window of confusion, where the chain of command is weak. That is the moment of maximum danger for Taiwan. Putin is watching. If the U.S. State Department is gutted of its career diplomats, who is managing the NATO alliance? Who is keeping the Europeans in line? The transition period of this bureaucratic purge, the first 12 to 18 months of the administration, will be the most dangerous moment for American national security since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why? Because for the first time in history, the American government will be at war with itself, not Democrat versus Republican, but the White House versus the agencies. And amidst this chaos, there is a wild card player we haven't discussed yet, the governors. We are seeing a coalition of blue state governors, California, New York, Illinois, preparing what they call firewalls. They are passing state laws to refuse cooperation with federal agents. If EO 11099 orders a federal crackdown on sanctuary cities or federalizes the National Guard for deportations, we could see a constitutional standoff where state police are physically blocking federal agents. This isn't the Civil War of 1861 with armies in the field. It's a soft civil war fought with subpoenas, injunctions, and jurisdiction battles, but the economic damage will be just as real. So let's recap the battlefield before we look at what this does to your wallet. On one side, a disruptive president armed with Executive Order 14099, backed by the Supreme Court, Silicon Valley billionaires, and a populist mandate to burn the system down. On the other side, the entrenched bureaucracy, the legacy media, the intelligence community, and the defense establishment fighting for their survival. This is an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, and usually, when that happens, things break. The last time a president tried to challenge the banking and intelligence establishment this aggressively was John F. Kennedy. The last time a president tried to impound funds and crush the bureaucracy was Richard Nixon. Neither of those ended well, but Trump has something they didn't have. He has the benefit of hindsight. He has seen the playbook. And this time, his team isn't comprised of establishment Republicans trying to play nice. It is comprised of legal demolition experts who have spent 4 years in the wilderness sharpening their knives. They aren't looking for a truce. They are looking for unconditional surrender. And the battlefield where the blood will be spilled isn't Pennsylvania Avenue. It's the stock market. It's the bond market. It's the US dollar. Because chaos is expensive. When the Department of Energy is paralyzed by mass firings, what happens to oil futures? When the FDA is tied up in lawsuits, what happens to biotech stocks? When the DOJ antitrust division is suddenly weaponized against companies that don't play ball with the new administration, what happens to your 401k? The market hates uncertainty, and we are barreling toward the most uncertain period in American history. You need to understand that the deep state isn't just a political entity, it's an economic one. It stabilizes the system. It ensures that contracts get paid, that regulations remain predictable, that the status quo is maintained. EO 14099 is the end of stability. It is the introduction of high-stakes volatility into every sector of American life. So, how do you navigate a world where the government is at war with itself? What are the specific timelines for this chaos? If we look at the leaked transition documents, we can actually map out the next 90 days. We know exactly which agencies fall first. We know which executive orders are queued up behind 14099. And most importantly, we know the black swan event that the opposition is planning to trigger if they feel like they are losing. This is the part that isn't being reported. This is the nuclear option of the bureaucratic resistance. It involves the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the kill switch. If the unelected bureaucracy feels truly threatened by EO 14099, they won't protest with picket signs, they will protest with liquidity. Imagine a coordinated tightening of the money supply designed to trigger a recession so severe it forces the administration to capitulate. They will try to starve the new regime of the capital it needs to function. But here is the prediction most analysts are too terrified to vocalize. Trump won't blink. If the Fed weaponizes the economy against the presidency, EO 14099 provides the legal pretext to do the unthinkable. Bring the Federal Reserve directly under executive control. This moment marks the birth of the new American order. In the immediate aftermath, specifically the next 6 to 12 months, we are looking at extreme, localized volatility. We're talking about a tug of war where your purchasing power fluctuates based on who wins the daily news cycle. We predict that several blue state governors will attempt to withhold federal tax revenue in retaliation, creating a constitutional standoff that makes modern political polarization look like a polite dinner party. However, look past the smoke. The long-term consequence isn't collapse, it's total consolidation. Once the dust settles, the agencies that survive won't be independent fiefdoms anymore. They will be direct instruments of the White House. The administrative state, often called the fourth branch of government, will be effectively dissolved. This results in a leaner, more aggressive America on the global stage, but a deeply fractured one at home. You need to prepare for a reality where neutral ground no longer exists. The institutions you trusted to remain apolitical, your bank, your currency, the supply chain delivering your groceries, are about to be forced to pick a side. The new American order isn't coming in 2028. It is being written right now, in real time, by the victors of this silent, bureaucratic war. It is a winner-take-all scenario.